Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth Series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Friday, March 11th. It's also a great pleasure to have with us today two state officials who are here to tell us a little bit about, well, I guess you could say the background of Sunshine Week. Sunshine Week will be occurring next week from March 13th to the 19th. It's a national initiative was spearheaded by the News Leaders Association to educate the public about the importance of open government and the dangers of excessive and unnecessary secrecy. It began in March of 2005 and basically it has been observed every year since in mid-March. So here we are this year, and here to help us explain a little bit about that. We're really pleased to have with us today Secretary of State Jim Condos and also Deputy Secretary of State Chris Winters. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for making the time for our conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate being here.
Thanks for having us.
So, on Sunshine Week, there are a couple of areas to kind of, I guess, come to mind about open government, transparency, and the like. And I thought a good place for us to start would be around the Vermont Open Records Act. If let's say, a journalist or a private citizen or anyone wanted to sort of obtain documents to kind of better understand something, why the state or state government did something, how would they go about filing a request for that information?
You want to take
Why
that,
don't you
Jim?
go ahead and take that?
All right, I'll take it.
Chris is our official records officer for the agency, so I'll let him start with that.
All right, thanks, Jim. As the records officer, all of those requests for public records come through me. Anyone can make it. We don't question the motive or the identity of the person making a request for a public record. And I think first it's important to say what a public record is. It's any sort of document created in the course, created or acquired in the course of agency business. So that's a public record. You start with that. There are all kinds of public records. Some of them are subject to exemptions where they can't be disclosed. So if anyone makes a request for a public record by a state agency, the agency has to respond promptly and either produce that record or tell the requester why it's exempt and specifically cite the statute that makes it exempt. So that's the process. There's also an appeal process from there. So if you make a request for a public record, and you're denied, you can appeal that to the head of the agency. And then there's also an enforcement process in the Superior Court. So when we talk about public records, we talk about why it's important. The public has a right to know. And I think in our conversation today, we'll come back to that a lot. The public has a right to know what their government is up to. Those are their records, subject to some exemptions for confidentiality and personal information reasons, perhaps, that are set forth by the legislature. But those are their records, and it's important to accountability of our government and rebuilding trust in government, which is something that's an issue that we really have to make sure we face. And that was the op-ed that Secretary Condos and I wrote together, was talking about transparency through public records and open meetings as the key to rebuilding trust.
So, and Andrew, I would just add to that is that if you actually look at the statutes, it's Title I, and it's subsections 310 through 320. That is both the open meeting law and the Public Records Act. One follows the other. Open meeting law is first. But both of those have as their policy is based upon the Constitution. And the Constitution, it's Chapter 1, Article 6, that says that all, I've got it right here, it says that all power being originally inherent in and consequently derived from the people, therefore all officers of government, whether legislative or executive, are their trustees and servants, and they are at all times accountable. And that's the premise that we've taken. I think you might remember Andrew, going back to, when I first ran in 2010, my mantra at that time was good government is open government. I've maintained that philosophy through my entire Secretary of State's career. And I know Chris espounds that as well. It's a very simple concept, but it's based on our Constitution and it's based on our laws. And as I think the one of the rallying cries that we hear out there is that sunshine is the best disinfectant. I think that's true about our government access.
Do you get a lot of requests for public records over the course of a given year, or is it really much more episodic?
Well, I think it's sort of interesting because there's a lot of requests that we get for records that would not necessarily be classified as a public record. For instance, people ask for the voter checklist. That's a public record, and we respond to those. If you go to your town clerk and you ask to see your assessment on your house, that's a public record. And there are all these different things that we ask in government, or the government is asked by the public. And we always, the things that seem to get the news story is when it's a serious issue, like, for instance, EB5 or something like that.
And the process, does that begin like at a local town clerk's office, or would someone go to your website and, click on a link there, or how would that work?
Well, I think it depends on what record you're looking for.
That's right.
So you need to know who the custodian of that record is, who actually has the control of that record. So if it's a local issue, you would go to your local town clerk, or whoever's in charge at that level. And if it's at state government, you would go to the appropriate agency to request those records.
And I'll just add, Jim, that we have a form on our website where you can request a public record. We get those at least a couple of times a week, or depending on how you define it, a lot more than that, because as Jim said, people request public information from us all the time. Often when they don't know where to go, they come to the Secretary of State's office. So a lot of what I'll do a couple of times a day maybe is get a request for a public record that we are not the custodian of. So I will point people in the right direction, which includes, giving them specific information about, that's a land record that would be in this town. So contact the town clerk or an agency. And each agency is actually required to have a records officer and a link on their website as to how to acquire a public record, who to contact. So if you go to any state agency website, you're going to find their records officer and their public contact, hopefully right on the front page is what where it's supposed to be. And I point people in those directions all the time. And if you want to get something from a specific agency, go to their homepage. The information should be right there.
Building a bit on that, I wondered if we could talk for a few minutes about open meeting laws, kind of related, I suppose, to open records. I guess just the first question would be, who has to follow the open meeting laws? Is it simply like public bodies like select boards or school boards, or?
So the open meeting law, as you said, applies to public bodies and public bodies of the state and of its municipalities. So that means any state or municipal board, any council, any commission, or any committee or subcommittee of those bodies. So the open meeting law governs select boards, school boards, planning commissions, development review boards, boards of civil authority, library trustees, cemetery commissions, any of those subdivisions of the state or its municipalities. So if they're meeting and it's a quorum of the body, and they're discussing board business, then they're required to comply with the open meeting law.
If they accept public money in some way or another, that's kind of the key? No.
There are instances where it's not entirely clear whether the open meeting law applies. Sometimes there are nonprofits, sometimes there are library commissions and library trustees where they've agreed to abide by the open meeting law, as a condition of perhaps accepting state or municipal funding. So you may see that time and again where they're not clearly defined as a public body under the open meeting law, but they've kind of volunteered to have that apply to them.
Yeah, and I think it's, there have been some major situations. I think, for instance, Vermont, I don't remember if it was Vermont Public Radio or Vermont Public TV,
right.
Which
PBS,
currently is the, they're one and the same now, but they joined together. But at one point there was an issue that came up, and the open meeting law was cited. And the original thought was, well, we don't have to follow it. But it turned out that the federal dollars that they were getting from the Center for Public Broadcasting actually had a provision in the funding that went to the aid or the organization that said they must follow their state's open meeting law. So after that, they started to do that. And I think there's been other cases where maybe a large community with multiple members of a city council, for instance, they might have a subcommittee for their budget, for charter changes, things like that. And I know that, and I'm thinking in terms of the city of Burlington, they have now, I think it's 13 or something members of their city council, but at the time, it was still up there, that kind of a number, but they were having these 3-member committees and thought they didn't have to follow the open meeting law because they didn't have a quorum of the overall body. And that's not the way the law is written. The law says that it's a quorum of the committee that is required to follow the open meeting law. So if it's a 3-member committee, then 2 members creates a quorum. Therefore, if 2 members are meeting to discuss business, they've got to have follow the open meeting law.
And one of the other areas, I guess, it's occasionally been problematic is this whole business of emails or text messages shared between, let's say, committee members or select board members. Are those also subject to open meeting law revelation?
Well, it obviously depends on the subject matter. But you need to be careful, and we always advise people. There's no real case law on that, at least not here in Vermont. And we always advise people that whether it's your personal email, personal telephone, or a city or state sponsored phone or email, it really is not. Well, I did it on my personal phone, therefore it doesn't count. It's really what the topic was. And if you were talking about, say, the municipal budget on your phone, that would be considered, requestable. That would be considered a public record. So you need to really be careful about that. And I think, I don't know this for sure, Andrew, but I think I just saw a comment by VLCT, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, where a vast majority of their towns are actually issuing town emails to their select board or school board members so that those records are kept, because otherwise you could run afoul of the law if you start deleting those without preserving them. So there's a lot of different scenarios out there. The legislature is a slightly different animal. First of all, I've always opined that the legislature should be following the open meeting law, should be following the Public Records Act. The Constitution says whether legislative or executive. It does not say judiciary. The judiciary has their own set of rules that they follow. But I've always said that the legislature needs to follow the law just like everybody else. They have their own interpretation that says that they don't, but that's something that nobody's challenged them yet in court, and I think that it'll probably take a court case to resolve it.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate that there is a lot of gray in the open meeting and public records laws. So there's constant interpretation going on there, reading between the lines. We like to give out the advice that's conservative and that leans in favor of the public's right to know. So whether it's text messaging at an open meeting or something you may have seen in the news fairly recently was the legislature using the Zoom chat when, someone watching on YouTube wouldn't be able to see the chat part of this, or even privately chatting each other during a meeting. I don't think it's expressly prohibited by the open meeting law, but it definitely creates the appearance of an impropriety of shadow conversations happening without the public knowing. So it really goes against the public's right to know if you're having these shadow conversations during an open meeting. And I guess the last thing I'll say is going back to the tying in the Public Records Act, like Secretary Condos said, text messaging among a public body, that's creating a record. That's creating a public record, whether it's on your personal phone or your Facebook Messenger or what, if you're doing agency business. So there's your nice tie-in between the open meeting law and the Public Records Act, and it all goes back to the public's right to know.
And Andrew, I think the kind of the mantra that Chris and I use often is we say that the public has a right to know, the public has a right to attend, and the public has a right to participate. It's pretty simple when you're talking about the open meeting law.
At this stage in Vermont, we'll focus here. Are there going to be any changes to the current setup where folks can vote absentee, vote early, don't have to have an excuse to vote absentee, or was that something that's going to change perhaps after the pandemic is hopefully finally over?
Well, let me just say this. We had, in 2020, we used temporary authorization from the legislature because we were in a pandemic, and our interest was to protect citizens' rights to be able to vote, but also protect their health and safety, as well as our poll workers at the local level. So there was a lot of things that we did, and we went to vote by mail. We've had 45 days of early voting since probably 2008 or 9, I forget exactly when. And before that, it was 30 days. Now it's 45. But we've always had no excuse absentee voting. Anybody could request it. What we did in 2020 was we removed that request part of it and said, okay, for the general election, we will mail one to every active registered voter that we had on our system. We have just under 500,000 people who are registered to vote. It was a huge undertaking. It was hugely successful. We ended up increasing our voter participation by 75%, to 75%, which before that it was below 70. So we did have a huge increase. And on top of that, we found, we heard the cries, about voter fraud and all that. We had 7 cases of voter fraud that were referred to us. The Attorney General's office has the investigative side of that. And they dismissed 6 of them, saying it was mostly administrative error. There was only one case that actually someone tried, it didn't work, but they tried to vote twice, once by mail and then once in person. And in the investigation, they found that the guy said, well, he was doing it to prove that the system didn't work. Well, the system did work. He got caught and he was adjudicated. So, we feel confident that what we're doing is good. We also, after the 2020 election, the legislature actually made vote by mail permanent. What we did in 2020, we did it basically, making decisions as we went through the process. Now we've got permanency, and we're actually putting in place and have been putting in place the procedures, the contracts that we need to move forward. As far as the voter registration list, we're really pleased to be a member of what's called ERIC. It's the Electronic Registration Information Consortium. There's about 30, I think it's 31 or 32 states that are currently members. It's a state-driven process. It's paid for by the states, nobody else. And essentially, we share our voter registration files. They're anonymized and secured. We share them, and they will give us back reports that says, okay, you've got these 1,000 people who have died and should be removed. So we can do that. You have these duplications in your system, so we can remove those. Then we have the ones where people have moved out of state or moved within the state, and we forward those on to the town clerks to resolve. And that will just make our systems even more accurate than they are currently. And lastly, and Chris and I, we're really proud of this. Just yesterday, MIT does a post-general election, essentially an audit, but it's a performance index of all 50 states. They use the same information from all 50 states through the Election Assistance Commission in DC. And Vermont, for the second presidential year in a row, was ranked as the #1 state in the country. So we are extremely pleased with that. And we want to, we're going to do everything we can in our power to maintain that positive outlook on our processes and our systems. And it recognizes different things. Same-day voter registration. It recognizes online voter registration. It recognizes all the different aspects of voter registration. Automatic voter. It registers how long people had to wait in line to get in to vote. Things like that. So it's very data-driven, and it's the MIT. You can go to their website, Andrew, afterwards. It's the MIT Election Performance Index.
Secretary Winters, I know this has been an area you've worked on a fair amount, so it seems like things are going pretty well then on this front as we move forward this year into an election year.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Secretary Condos really sets the vision and the agenda, and I'm the boots on the ground who goes over to the legislature and works with our elections division to help implement everything. And as he said, we have what's considered the gold standard in states when it comes to elections administration, whether that's 45 days of early voting, no excuse absentee balloting, vote by mail, automatic voter registration, same day registration. We do post-election audits. We have paper ballots. All of those things lead us to be best in the nation for the third time in the last second time in the last three general elections. So we're really proud of that, and we think everything really is going well. When you talk about transparency and tying it back to Sunshine Week, there are a lot of people out there who talk about the system is rigged or there's some widespread voter fraud. We think transparency is really important to that. So these measures that MIT did, that's data that's out there, that's available. It's a fact. And then when it comes to understanding elections, we think if people would ask their town clerks, maybe volunteer to be a poll worker, see how this really works. Elections are complicated, and there's a lot of procedure and a lot of safeguards around it. And our experience has been when people actually go and understand the process, they understand that some of these conspiracy theories are just way too far-fetched and couldn't possibly happen with the systems that we have.
Town meeting. We just finished town meeting week here in Vermont. And of course, it's last couple of years have been a little different from the traditional version we all gotten used to. But it's always struck me, it has for a while, so this dates back to before the pandemic, really, how in a lot of communities that have in-person floor voting, you get a tiny fraction of the community or the checklist showing up and actually making decisions for the community on, really important stuff like the town budget or whatever else may be on the warning that year. And the question always seems to come up, hey, that's not really very democratic if, a handful of people basically make decisions for the entire town. Do you think there's going to come a point when, that's just not going to be sustainable? That, town meeting will have to either be all Australian ballot or just have to find another way of doing a town's business if only 5 or 10% of the voters on the checklist bother to show up at the floor meeting or cast a ballot at all. Any thoughts around that?
Well, you really have hit the nail on the head as to we've heard it all about town meeting, and I would hate to be the Secretary of State that put a nail in the coffin of town meeting. I think it is a time-honored tradition. It's direct democracy. I do think the larger a community gets, the more they're looking at whether they go to some other form. Now, I'll just speak from, I grew up in the city of South Burlington, and back in the early 70s, we had we were a town at the time. We had a very contested election. Usually they had town meeting at the city council chambers. Well, it was too small. Too many people showed up. So they moved it across the street to the school auditorium. Again, too many people, as time went on, too many people showed up. They moved it to the gym. Too many people showed up. And after that year, I think it was 1972, they actually decided to go become a city, and then they went to Australian ballot. We hear this all the time. We hear both sides of this. We hear people who want more town meeting in person, and we hear people who want more Australian ballot. And consequently, as you probably are aware, Andrew, there's basically 3 ways that a town meeting day happens. One, everything is done from the floor. And as you said, that's usually a small percentage of people. Second, you have kind of a hybrid. We have some issues are done on the floor. Perhaps the budget is done from the floor, but candidates are voted on by Australian ballot, or you have the Australian ballot. It's not for me to say which is the best way or the only way. I think that's really still a town issue, but I do think that what we're seeing, and I think this past two town meetings have shown that towns are contemplating moving to Australian ballot in some form. What that means for the future, I don't know. I hope it doesn't. It's not the death knell for town meeting, because I do think town meeting is an important function of city government, town government. But I think there is we got to figure out how to get more people involved. Chris?
Yeah, I'll just add that I've lived in 3 towns in Vermont, in Williamstown, in Cabot, and now in Berlin, and I love the floor meeting. I love going to town meeting. It's a wonderful tradition. It's a great way to see your neighbors, work together with your neighbors, have respectful dialogue, and be a legislator for a day. But, having said that, it's not as inclusive as Australian ballot. And some people just aren't comfortable going into that town meeting situation and interacting in that way. So, there's definitely 2 sides to this. It's a difficult problem. I don't think we have the solution for it, but we do. Of course, we want to see as many people as possible vote during town meetings and participate during town meetings, but it would also be a shame to do away with that tradition and that community aspect.
Boy, no kidding. It's really is the closest thing to genuine grassroots democracy I think we have going on anywhere, just about. I just want to thank you both, Secretary of State Jim Condos, Deputy Secretary of State Chris Winters, for making the time for this conversation about Sunshine Week, which will be occurring probably when many of you will be watching this. Next week, as we're talking to you today, it'll be March 13th to the 19th. So great opportunity to file a public records request with your town clerk, perhaps, to honor that, to find out everything you've ever wanted to know. Anyway, thanks again, gentlemen. And to those of you who've been watching, thank you for being with us today. Hope you found our program interesting. And, we'll see you again the next time.